Unscripted laughter. The first thing anyone noticed that day was the silence before laughter. The studio lights glowed softly above a simple set, where Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock had gathered for a small reunion interview marking 25 years since their first film together. The cameras had not yet started rolling, and yet something about the air already felt different. A few crew members whispered, trying not to disturb the calm before the recording began. Keanu sat quietly, his hands resting on his knees, his expression peaceful but distant. Sandra entered moments later, smiling at everyone, but her eyes carried a trace of nostalgia. When their eyes met, it wasn't the usual polite smile between colleagues. It was something warmer, something wordless. They hadn't spoken in months. The last time they did, it was a brief text exchange about a charity event. But today, face to face again, they both felt a familiar comfort neither could explain. Their laughter had once filled sets, long nights, and difficult days. Now it waited quietly, like an old friend outside a locked door. The interviewer called for quiet, and the red recording light blinked on. Sandra folded her hands on her lap, ready. Keanu gave a slight nod. The first question came softly. "After all these years, what do you remember most about working together?" Sandra glanced at him before answering. "The laughter," she said. "Always the laughter." Keanu smiled, eyes gentle. "Yeah, it was never planned. Just happened." The crew smiled too. But as minutes passed, it became clear this interview was going to be different. No rehearsed jokes, no polished promotion talk. The questions shifted toward life, loss, and learning. Sandra's tone softened as she talked about resilience after heartbreak. Keanu spoke about solitude and how kindness from strangers had saved him more than once. The audience behind the cameras leaned forward. The world outside waited for light-hearted nostalgia, but what unfolded was a quiet storm of emotion. Halfway through, a technical glitch halted filming. The host stepped aside to fix the mic, leaving them momentarily alone. That's when Sandra leaned in and whispered, "Do you ever miss the old days?" Her voice trembled slightly, like she was afraid of the answer. Keanu thought for a moment before replying. "I miss the honesty of them," he said softly. "When everything wasn't about what people wanted to see?" Sandra nodded slowly. "Yeah," she said, smiling faintly. "Back when we didn't know who we were supposed to be yet." There was silence between them, but not the awkward kind. It was the kind that held shared memories, unsaid gratitude, and small regrets. The lights flickered and Sandra laughed. Keanu looked at her surprised. "What's funny?" he asked. She shook her head, laughing harder now. "Just this. All of it. We're sitting here in front of 100 people pretending we're strangers who once knew each other." She laughed again, and it wasn't the soft media laugh. It was real, unguarded. Keanu couldn't help but smile, then laugh too. It was quiet at first, then warm and full, echoing across the set. The cameras, still technically off, captured it anyway. Later, that unscripted moment would go viral. Two old friends laughing without a script, breaking the illusion of fame. But right now, no one cared about the internet. The laughter reminded them who they really were. Two souls who once found joy in the smallest things. As their laughter faded, Sandra wiped a tear from her eye. "You know," she said, "sometimes I think laughter is the only way we survive life." Keanu nodded slowly. "And kindness," he added. "You never forget the people who were kind when they didn't have to be." The silence returned, heavier now. Behind the scenes, a young production assistant named Ella watched them, eyes wide. She had joined the team that morning, nervous and unnoticed. Her hand still shook from spilling coffee earlier near Keanu's chair, but instead of anger, he had just smiled and said, "It happens to all of us." That simple moment had changed how she saw him. Now, hearing him speak about kindness, she realized it wasn't a quote. It was who he was. The shoot resumed. The laughter turned to reflection, and the reflection slowly into revelation. Keanu shared how losing people taught him to cherish presence, not promises. Sandra spoke about the quiet strength of starting over. Each word carried weight, and yet there was no sadness. Only peace. They weren't performing. They were being. And in a world built on pretending, that truth hit everyone watching like sunlight breaking through clouds. As the session neared its end, the host asked one final question. If you could go back and tell your younger selves one thing, what would it be? Keanu paused, looking toward the floor before answering. Don't rush healing, he said. The world will tell you to move on fast, but your heart deserves time. Sandra took a deep breath. And don't hold your laughter in, she said. Even when life hurts, laugh. It reminds you you're still alive. The crew applauded softly. The light above the camera turned off, signaling the end. But no one moved. Not yet. It was as if everyone felt that something important had just happened. Something pure, beyond fame or fame's noise. As they stood to leave, Sandra turned to him and said, You know, we should do something real again. No scripts, just talk. Keanu smiled. Maybe laughter will find us again. She grinned. It already did. Outside the studio, the sun was setting, painting the sky gold. Ella, still emotional, walked behind them, watching as the two stars stepped into the fading light, laughing quietly about something no one else could hear. For the first time all day, she realized that fame wasn't what made people shine. It was their ability to stay human despite it. And in that moment, a simple truth settled quietly between them all. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't written by directors or studios. They happen when hearts forget the camera is watching. Echoes of kindness, the video of that unscripted laughter spread faster than anyone expected. Within hours, social media was flooded with clips of Keanu and Sandra laughing like old friends. No filters, no background music. People around the world wrote how that laughter made them feel something they hadn't felt in years. Hope. Strangers commented that it reminded them of lost friendships and the beauty of small, honest moments. Others said it made them cry without knowing why. Sandra read a few of those comments late that night, sitting alone on her balcony. The city lights flickered below, and the hum of traffic felt distant. She had done hundreds of interviews before, but none had felt like this one. None had made her question what really mattered. She looked at her phone again, scrolling past the trending tags, until she stopped at one comment from a user named Ella J. It read, Sometimes kindness is louder than words. She smiled. She didn't know who Ella was, but the words stayed with her. For a moment, she thought of calling Keanu, then hesitated. Instead, she typed a short message. Thank you for today. It meant more than I can explain. Across the city, Keanu was sitting by his motorcycle, watching the same video replay on his tablet. When he received Sandra's message, he smiled faintly and typed back, It meant a lot to me, too. Maybe laughter isn't done with us yet. For the next few days, calls poured in from studios and talk shows wanting to recreate the magic moment. Producers offered large sums for a joint film reunion. Both declined quietly. They knew what the world wanted, another headline. But what they had shared wasn't a performance. It was something fragile, something real. And neither of them wanted to turn it into a spectacle. A week later, Sandra received a handwritten letter delivered to her office. It was from a woman named Ella, the same assistant from the shoot. Her handwriting trembled slightly. Dear Mrs. Bullock, I was there during your interview last week. I was the one who spilled coffee near Mr. Reeves. I thought I'd lose my job, but he was kind instead of angry. I watched you both talk about kindness, and it changed me. I've had a rough time lately, but that day reminded me to keep going. Thank you for being real. Sandra read it twice. Something in her chest tightened, a mix of emotion and recognition. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her journal. Later that evening, she called Keanu. He answered softly, his voice calm as always. Hey, he said. I was just about to call you. I got a letter, she said, from the assistant that was there. She said your kindness changed her. He was silent for a moment. I didn't do much, he said quietly. You did enough, she replied. Sometimes small things echo further than we think. There was a long pause on the line. Both could hear each other breathing, comfortable in the quiet. Then Keanu said, Maybe we should do something for her. Not for publicity, just to remind her she matters. What are you thinking? Something real. Maybe we visit her. Just show up? Yeah, he said with a small laugh. Unscripted. Sandra laughed too. You and your quiet ideas. All right, let's do it. 2 days later, they arrived at the studio office unannounced. The receptionist froze for a moment before whispering, Are you both here for a meeting? No, Sandra said with a warm smile. We're here for someone named Ella. Within minutes, a stunned young woman appeared holding a stack of files. Her hands shook slightly as she saw them standing in front of her. I don't understand, she stammered. Keanu smiled softly. We got your letter, he said. And we wanted to thank you. Ella blinked, confused. Me? But I just wrote it to say thank you to you both. Kindness works both ways, Sandra said gently. Your letter meant something to us. Ella's eyes filled with tears. I never thought anyone would even read it, Keanu nodded. Sometimes people notice when you least expect it. They spent nearly an hour with her in the quiet corner of the break room, listening as she shared her struggles, moving to the city alone, losing her mother last year, and trying to find meaning in a job that often felt invisible, she said. The laughter that day reminded her that light still existed, even after loss. As she spoke, Sandra listened with the kind of empathy that didn't need words. Keanu sat silently beside her, occasionally nodding, his eyes kind but heavy with understanding. He knew what it meant to lose someone, to carry that quiet grief through everyday moments. Before they left, Sandra handed Ella a small pendant she had worn during one of her first films. This was given to me by a friend when I was new, she said. He told me it would bring courage when I doubted myself. I think it belongs with you now. Ella hesitated, but Sandra insisted. Keep it, she said softly. And whenever life feels too heavy, remember there's still kindness in the world. After they left, Ella sat alone for a while, holding the pendant tightly in her hand. It wasn't the gift itself. It was the reminder that she was seen. Later that night, she opened her old journal and wrote, Today I learned that real kindness doesn't need cameras. It just needs courage. Meanwhile, Keanu and Sandra walked out into the evening light. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Sandra broke the silence. You know, every time something real happens, it never feels big in the moment. It's quiet, like laughter in a storm. Keanu smiled. That's the only kind that lasts. As they reached the parking lot, a group of fans noticed them and started waving excitedly. Instead of hiding, they waved back, smiling. Sandra whispered, Maybe the world needs more of this. Not performances, but presence. Keanu nodded slowly. Presence is the rarest kindness, he said. The two walked off in different directions, but something had changed between them. Not romance, not nostalgia, something deeper. A shared understanding that their laughter had started something far greater than a viral video. It had reopened a door to humanity in a world that often forgot how to feel. And somewhere, deep inside both their hearts, they sensed it was only the beginning of a journey they hadn't planned, one that would test their faith, their memories, and their definition of kindness itself. The forgotten letter, the following month, brought unexpected quiet. No interviews, no cameras, no scheduled appearances. Keanu and Sandra both kept their distance from the noise, staying off social media despite their laughter moments still trending. Yet behind that silence, something else was growing. A feeling that the world had responded not just to nostalgia, but to truth. One morning, Sandra received a letter with no sender name. It came in an old brown envelope, creased and soft, as if it had traveled through time. Inside was a faded photo of two children laughing beside a small stage, with the words, "Thank you for remembering laughter when the world forgot." There was no clue who sent it, only a faint address on the back from a community center in a small town outside Los Angeles. She called Keanu immediately. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Someone sent me a photo, 2 kids. It's old, maybe decades." Keanu listened quietly. "You think it's real?" "I don't know," she said softly. "But I think we should find out." The next day, they met in person for the first time since visiting Ella. Sandra brought the letter, still folded carefully in her bag. They sat in a small cafe away from the city crowd. Keanu turned the photo over in his hands, studying the faces. "They look happy," he said. "Almost too happy for the world they might have lived in." Sandra nodded. "The address says it's from a place called Willow Hearts Center. Ever heard of it?" He shook his head. "No." But if it's about laughter, maybe it's worth the drive. They decided to visit quietly without telling anyone. A few days later, their car pulled into a small town surrounded by golden fields. The Willow Hearts Center wasn't what they expected. It wasn't fancy or modern, just an old brick building with peeling paint and flowers growing stubbornly through cracks in the walkway. A young volunteer greeted them, her eyes widening when she recognized them. "You're—" she started, but Keanu smiled gently and interrupted. "Just visitors today." Inside, the walls were lined with photos of children from different decades. Some smiling, some serious. Laughter seemed to echo faintly in the halls, carried by old memories. Sandra stopped at one corner where a picture showed a man holding a small puppet, entertaining a group of sick children. Under it, a sign read, "Founded in memory of Michael Lane, the man who taught laughter to heal." A soft voice behind them said, "He was my father." They turned to see an elderly woman standing nearby, leaning on a cane. "He used to bring joy to children who had no reason to smile," she said. "After he passed, we kept this place running for years, until funding stopped. And now?" Sandra asked gently. "Now we struggle," the woman said, smiling sadly. "But some laughter still finds its way here." As she spoke, a small sound of giggling echoed from a nearby room. Keanu and Sandra followed it to find a few children playing with handmade puppets, their laughter filling the quiet space. One little boy turned to them and said, "We know you. You're the people who laughed on TV." They smiled, humbled. Sandra knelt beside him. "You saw that?" He nodded. "Miss Claire showed us. She said laughter can make people brave." Keanu sat down on the floor beside them, watching as one girl made her puppet wave hello. "She's right," he said softly. "Laughter is the sound of courage." The old woman, Miss Claire, walked in and placed the brown envelope on the table. "I sent this," she said quietly. "I saw that video of you two laughing. It reminded me of the way my father used to bring hope to this place. I wanted you to see what real laughter looks like. Not the kind made for cameras, but the kind that saves lives." Sandra's eyes softened. "Thank you for trusting us with it." "No," Miss Claire said, shaking her head. "Thank you. After that video, donations started coming in again. People said your laughter made them remember this center. We can keep helping children for another year." Keanu and Sandra looked at each other, speechless. Something so small, one unscripted laugh, had rippled into something powerful. As they spent time with the children that afternoon, Keanu noticed one boy sitting alone near the window, not joining the others. He had a small notebook filled with sketches of faces and stars. Keanu approached gently. "Hey," he said softly. "What are you drawing?" The boy didn't look up. "People who smile," he said. "Because I forget how sometimes—" Those words hit deep. Keanu sat beside him quietly, letting the silence speak. After a moment, he took a page from his own pocket notebook and drew a small, smiley face. "Here," he said. "You can borrow mine until you remember your own." The boy looked at it, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Thank you." When it was time to leave, Sandra hugged Miss Claire. "If you ever need help," she said sincerely, "call us. No media, no cameras, just us." Miss Claire smiled warmly. "That's rare, you know. People say kind things, but few mean it." Sandra looked at her. "We've learned that kindness only matters when it's quiet." On the drive back, they didn't talk much. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. Keanu finally said, "It's strange, isn't it? How something as small as laughter can change everything." Sandra nodded. "Maybe laughter is how kindness travels." He smiled faintly. "And maybe kindness is how laughter survives." When she dropped him off, Sandra stayed in the car for a long while, watching him disappear into the night. She thought about all the moments that had led to this, the laughter, the letter, the children. And she realized something powerful. Every unscripted moment of kindness was writing its own story, one act at a time. Later that night, she found another message waiting in her inbox. It was from Ella again. "Dear Sandra, I don't know if you'll read this, but I wanted you to know that I started volunteering at a children's center last week. They told me about a donation that arrived from 2 anonymous people. I think I know who they are. Thank you for reminding me that kindness doesn't end where fame begins." Sandra smiled softly. tears glistening in her eyes. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. The world had already heard her answer. Not through words, but through laughter that refused to fade. The promise of silence. The following weeks unfolded like a quiet film no one planned to make. The world slowly moved on to new headlines, but somewhere in the background, the echo of that laughter still lived. In classrooms, community centers, and lonely hearts that had rediscovered hope. Yet for Keanu and Sandra, something deeper had begun. It wasn't fame or nostalgia anymore. It was purpose. Keanu spent his mornings at a local workshop for disabled artists, quietly helping them repair tools and set up displays. He never announced his visits, and most of the artists didn't even realize who he was. One afternoon, while fixing a broken easel, a young woman named Rachel asked, "Why do you help us so much?" He smiled faintly. "Because someone once helped me when I needed it," he said. "And I never got to thank them." She tilted her head. "So you help others instead?" "It's the only way I know how," he said softly. Meanwhile, Sandra had been visiting Willow Heart Center again. She taught the kids simple breathing games to calm fear and shared stories from her childhood. She laughed more than she had in years, not the kind of laughter for cameras, but the kind that comes from letting your guard down. The children called her Miss Sunny. One boy said her smile made the room feel warmer, but behind all that warmth, there was something else building quietly. A storm that neither of them saw coming. One afternoon, while Keanu was leaving the art center, a man approached him near the parking lot. He wore a press badge and held a camera phone. "Mr. Reeves," he said quickly, "is it true you and Sandra are running a secret foundation together? The public deserves to know." Keanu froze for a moment, his expression calm but unreadable. "There's nothing secret," he said softly. "We just believe kindness doesn't need headlines," the man pressed again. "So you're confirming you've been donating to children's centers anonymously?" Keanu shook his head slightly. "If we are," he said, "then that's between the giver and the gift." He walked away quietly, but by nightfall, the rumor had already spread. Online posts claimed Keanu and Sandra were hiding a massive donation network. People debated whether it was real, while others accused them of using kindness as a marketing strategy. When Sandra saw the news, her heart sank. She called him immediately. "It's everywhere," she said. "They're turning it into gossip." Keanu sighed. "I know, I saw it too. What should we do?" "Nothing," he said calmly. "The truth doesn't need defending." She paused. "But it hurts. We tried to do something good and now it feels dirty." "Goodness stays clean," he replied softly, "even when words make it muddy." There was silence. She could hear the rain on his side of the call. It felt like the world was trying to test them, to see if their kindness would bend under pressure. 2 days later, a journalist named Aiden Lee sent a formal request to interview them for a feature about the quiet movement of compassion. Unlike others, his letter was respectful. He wrote, "If this is true, the world deserves to know, not for fame, but for faith in humanity." Sandra showed the letter to Keanu during a small meeting at a park. Birds sang softly around them as they sat on a wooden bench. "Maybe we should talk to him," she said. "Not to explain, but to share what kindness really means." Keanu thought for a long time before replying. "If we do it our way," he said. "No lights, no makeup, no edits. Just truth." The next evening, they met Aiden in a simple community hall, the same place where they first laughed together during the unscripted interview. The hall was empty except for one camera on a tripod and 3 chairs. Aiden began gently. "I want to start by asking, why silence? Why stay anonymous when the world celebrates recognition?" Sandra leaned forward. "Because kindness isn't currency," she said. "When people start measuring it, they stop feeling it." Keanu added softly, "We don't want to be remembered for what we gave. We want people to remember that giving is still possible." Aiden nodded slowly. "Do you believe silence protects kindness?" Keanu smiled faintly. "No, I think silence reveals it." The interview went on for an hour, but what made it powerful was the stillness between their words. There were long pauses where no one spoke, yet the room felt full of truth, humility, and something that no script could capture. When the interview aired a week later, it wasn't loud or dramatic. It was soft, slow, and real. Instead of music or editing tricks, it opened with Keanu saying quietly, "The world doesn't need heroes. It just needs people who still care." The reaction was overwhelming. Thousands of viewers wrote letters, not comments. Some enclosed old photos, some shared small acts of kindness they had done in secret. A janitor from Mexico City wrote, "I cleaned a hospital room after watching your video. I left a note that said, 'You are not alone.' The nurse who found it cried. Maybe kindness travels farther than we think." When Sandra read that one, she whispered, "This is the real award." And for Keanu, the words became a quiet mantra he carried everywhere, that kindness didn't need noise to matter. But as the movement grew, something unexpected began to happen. The donations flowing into small charities tripled overnight. People wanted to join what they called the laughter chain, yet not everyone understood it. Corporations began using the phrase in ads. Influencers started tagging it for attention, and soon the pure simplicity of it was at risk of being commercialized. Keanu felt uneasy. "We didn't start a brand," he said to Sandra one evening. "We just wanted to remind people to be human." She nodded slowly. "Maybe that's what happens when the world forgets how to be still." He looked at her, his voice low. "So what do we do now?" She smiled softly. "We do what we've always done, go back to the beginning." And that's what they did. No announcements, no interviews. They returned quietly to Willow Heart's center, where the laughter first found them again. When they arrived, the children ran toward them, holding up small hand-painted signs that read, "Thank you for remembering us." But one sign stood out. It was drawn by the boy who once said he forgot how to smile. It said simply, "Laughter remembered me." Keanu knelt down beside him, eyes glistening. "You remembered it too," he whispered, as the sun set through the cracked windows. Sandra looked around, at the walls painted by children, the laughter echoing again, and Keanu sitting quietly beside them. In that moment, she realized something profound. The promise they had made, to keep kindness alive, wasn't about being seen. It was about showing up again and again, even when the world stopped watching. The weight of light. The next few months passed like a long breath between heartbeats. The noise around their story faded again, replaced by the rhythm of ordinary life. But ordinary life, for Keanu and Sandra, had changed forever. They were no longer just actors sharing a past. They had become quiet guardians of something larger than themselves, a reminder that kindness could still move unseen through the world. One cold morning in December, Sandra woke to a message from Miss Claire at Willow Heart Center. It was brief but urgent. "The storm last night destroyed part of the roof. We're trying to save what we can." Without hesitation, she called Keanu. "The center's been hit," she said. "They need help." Keanu was already awake, standing by his window, watching rain blur the city. "I'll meet you there in 2 hours," he said softly. When they arrived, the damage was worse than either expected. Water dripped from the ceiling. Children's drawings lay soaked on the floor, and one corner of the hall had collapsed. Miss Claire stood among volunteers, her face calm but tired. "We'll rebuild," she said firmly. "We always do." Sandra took her hand. "You won't do it alone." Without any press, without announcements, Keanu and Sandra spent the day working beside volunteers. Keanu helped clear debris while Sandra dried the remaining drawings by the heater. At one point, she found the boy's sketchbook, the one filled with smiles and stars. Most pages were ruined, but one drawing remained untouched. It was a picture of 2 people standing in sunlight, surrounded by laughing children. Above them, in shaky letters, the boy had written, "The people who brought light." She held it close to her chest. That night, after everyone left, only a handful of candles lit the half-broken room. Keanu sat near the wall, his hands covered in dust, looking at the flickering light. "Funny," he said quietly. "Light always finds a way in, even through cracks." Sandra nodded, sitting beside him. "Maybe that's where it belongs. Through cracks. That's how it reaches people." There was silence between them, the kind that didn't need filling. She looked at him. The lines of fatigue around his eyes, the quiet strength in his stillness. You ever think we're doing enough? She asked softly. He thought for a moment. Enough? He repeated. No one ever really knows. But if even one person finds hope because we showed up, then maybe that's enough for today. The following morning, they woke to something unexpected. Hundreds of local volunteers had shown up with supplies, teachers, parents, carpenters, and students. Somehow word had spread. But this time, it wasn't because of fame or headlines. It was because of whispers. Kindness had traveled quietly, hand to hand, heart to heart. Within a week, the roof was repaired. The laughter returned, stronger than before. Miss Claire stood before them during the reopening and said, "This center was built on kindness, but what rebuilt it was belief. Belief that kindness still matters." Everyone applauded softly. No one shouted, no cameras flashed. It was just warmth, honest and shared. After the ceremony, the boy with the sketchbook ran to them, holding something behind his back. "I made you something," he said shyly. He handed Keanu a small clay sculpture, 2 hands holding a candle. "For the people who taught me light doesn't die," he whispered. Keanu crouched to his level, eyes glistening. "You taught us that too," he said softly. For days after, both of them couldn't stop thinking about the boy's words. Sandra carried the sculpture home and placed it on her table beside the old brown envelope from the first letter. The two things, side by side, felt like chapters of the same story, a story they never wrote, but somehow became part of. A few weeks later, Sandra got another message. This time, it wasn't from Miss Claire or the center. It was from Ella, the young assistant they had once met. "I wanted you to know something," Ella wrote. "After volunteering for a few months, I've decided to start a kindness initiative for young filmmakers, to tell stories about people who never make the news but change lives quietly. I'm calling it Unscripted. I hope that's okay." Sandra smiled when she read the name. She immediately called Keanu. "She's starting something," Sandra said. "A project inspired by us. She's calling it Unscripted." There was silence on the line. Then Keanu said softly, "Maybe the story has found its next voice?" He paused. "You realize what this means, right? That we've started something that doesn't need us anymore," she said gently. "Exactly," he whispered. "And that's how you know it's real." Weeks passed, and the first episode of Unscripted aired online. It wasn't about celebrities or grand gestures. It showed short films of everyday people. A nurse sitting with patients after hours, a retired teacher planting trees, a bus driver giving free rides to those who couldn't afford them. The closing message said simply, "Kindness doesn't need a stage. It just needs someone to begin." Millions watched. But what mattered most were the quiet changes it inspired. Schools started community days, strangers began leaving small notes of hope, and people shared stories of kindness without hashtags or applause. When Keanu and Sandra met again, months later, they sat in the same park bench where it all began. The air was cool, the trees whispering above them. "You ever think about how it all started?" Sandra asked. Keanu smiled faintly. "Two people laughing when they weren't supposed to." She laughed softly. And now that laughter built a world. He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "It didn't build a world," he said. "It reminded one." They sat in silence for a long time. Nearby, a little girl chased a butterfly, her laughter filling the air. Keanu watched her and said quietly, "Every laugh like that is proof that light still wins." Sandra nodded. "And maybe it always will, as long as we keep remembering." As the sun began to set, they stood and walked toward the edge of the park. Behind them, the golden light stretched across the benches, the trees, and the world that had changed without anyone noticing. In their hearts, they knew the journey wasn't over. Something was waiting still. A final act. A last ripple of kindness that would test how far their laughter could truly travel. Where laughter ends and love begins, spring arrived softly that year, like a whisper the world almost forgot to hear. The air smelled of rain and new beginnings, and somewhere within it all, the echoes of laughter still lingered. The same laughter that had once started by accident, on a quiet set between two souls who simply chose to be real, but this time, Keanu and Sandra were walking separate paths again. After the success of Unscripted, Ella had taken the project global, filming ordinary stories of kindness across countries. She often sent them updates, short videos of children smiling, strangers helping strangers, people rebuilding forgotten communities. Each clip began the same way, with the faint sound of laughter in the background. "That sound has become our logo," Ella wrote once. "The sound of unscripted joy." Keanu smiled when he read that. He had been spending time traveling quietly through small towns, meeting the kinds of people whose names never made headlines. He fixed broken benches, funded school repairs without signatures, and wrote anonymous letters to volunteers who never knew they'd inspired him. He carried a small camera with him everywhere, capturing not faces but hands, the hands of those who worked, built, healed, and helped. He called it the hands that hold the world. Sandra, meanwhile, had begun mentoring young actors, not in performance, but in patience. She told them, "Fame fades. Kindness doesn't." She showed them clips from Unscripted, telling them how laughter had changed more lives than any script she ever read. She smiled more these days, softer, wiser, but a part of her still missed those quiet conversations with Keanu, the stillness they shared, the way silence had meaning when he was near. One evening, as she was leaving a charity event, her phone rang. It was Miss Claire. Her voice trembled slightly. "Dear," she said softly, "there's something you should know. The boy, the one with the drawings, he's very sick." His condition returned. "He's asking for you and Keanu." Sandra's breath caught. She didn't hesitate. Within hours, she was on a call with Keanu. She didn't even need to explain. "I'll be there," he said simply. When they arrived at the hospital, the boy's room was filled with paper stars hanging from the ceiling, each one drawn with a smiling face. Miss Claire said, "He wanted to fill the room with laughter so it wouldn't be afraid." Keanu and Sandra stood beside the boy's bed. He looked weak but still managed to smile. "I told the nurse I was waiting for my heroes," he whispered. Sandra held his hand gently. "We're not heroes," she said softly. "You are," the boy laughed faintly. "Then we're all heroes." He reached for his sketchbook, the same one from before, and handed it to Keanu. "I made one last drawing," he said. On the page was a picture of 3 people sitting under the stars, laughing together. Above it, the boy had written, "Laughter doesn't end. It travels." Keanu felt his throat tighten. "It does," he said quietly. "It travels farther than you think." For hours they stayed with him, telling stories, drawing pictures, and making the machines in the room seem less frightening. At one point, Sandra looked around and whispered, "It feels like the first day we laughed again." Keanu nodded, because kindness came back full circle. The boy fell asleep peacefully before dawn, still holding the sketchbook. The next morning, the world outside woke up to sunlight. But inside that small room, silence had its own meaning, not of loss, but of peace. Weeks later, at a quiet memorial for the boy, children from Willow Heart's center gathered with candles and laughter. They didn't cry. They told jokes, shared stories, and painted stars on the walls. Miss Claire said, "He didn't want silence to be sad. He wanted it to be gentle." After everyone left, Keanu and Sandra stayed behind. They sat in the empty hall where their laughter had first echoed months ago. It looked the same, yet everything felt different, deeper. Sandra spoke first. "Do you ever wonder why it was us? Why laughter chose us that day?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Maybe because we needed it most." She looked down at her hands, then at him. "You think kindness ever ends?" He shook his head slowly. "No, it changes shape. It becomes someone's courage, someone's second chance." Sandra's eyes softened. "And laughter?" He looked at her, the corners of his eyes glistening. "Laughter is love without fear," he said quietly. For a long moment they just sat there, side by side, in silence that didn't feel empty. It felt like the world breathing. A gentle breeze came through the cracked window, making one of the paper stars swing slightly. It caught the light, glowing like a tiny sun. Sandra smiled. "You see that?" Keanu nodded. "The light always finds a way." She turned toward him. "So do people. He smiled, that soft, humble smile that always carried warmth. Then maybe laughter found us again, just in a different form. Sandra stood looking around the hall one last time. "I think it's time we go," she said softly. Keanu rose too, but before leaving he placed the boy's clay sculpture, the candle held by two hands, on a small wooden table near the window. Sunlight touched it gently, he whispered. "This light belongs to everyone now." They stepped outside into the morning. Children were playing in the distance, their laughter echoing across the open field. Sandra and Keanu paused, listening. It was the same sound that had started everything, pure, unscripted, unplanned, and as they walked away, side by side, their reflections stretched long in the golden light, fading slowly into the day. The world kept turning, quietly healed by laughter that would never truly end, because laughter was never just sound. It was proof that kindness still breathes, in silence, in sorrow, in love.